Hit read. Okay, I'm everybody. Okay, and then I'm going to go down here. Okay. Hi, everybody. This session will start in just a few minutes.
And if someone would be so kind as to tell me which of my screens they're seeing right now. Are you seeing a slide deck or are you seeing a
State of the field?
State of the field. Okay, wonderful.
And I think I'll give it one more minute and then do the introductions, Kelly.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone, for showing up.
Welcome, everybody, to the State of the Field results from the National Survey of Competency-Based Education session. My name's Kaylon McCabe, and I'm moderating this session. And before I introduce our presenter, I've got just a few housekeeping items to share with you. Please note that we're in a Zoom meeting and that you have both video and audio or microphone capability, but we're asking that you keep your microphone muted unless you're interacting in some way, for example, during a Q&A type of situation. Please take your cues from the presenter and from me so that we can create a productive environment for everybody. And should you have questions or comments otherwise, please enter them into the chat box. And as time allows, we'll present your questions to the presenter. Additionally, you may use the chat feature to share your thoughts with the presenter and with each other. You also have the capability to post reactions like the thumbs up, etc., on your video, and please feel free to use these as appropriate. Thanks for being with us, and please enjoy the session. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Kelly Parsons, the senior researcher at American Institute for Research.
Thank you so much, and happy Friday, everyone. Thank you for opting to spend some of your Friday in this session. My hope is that we can make it discussion oriented. Of course, have some slides to share. I promised to share results and findings, so I will, of course, do that. But I look forward to discussions, your questions, you wrestling with what's most interesting or what might be useful to you. So I hope you're prepared. I wanted to give you plenty of warning that there will be time for that. So just by way of introduction, this is me. I'm also over here with the pink background screen. I'm a senior researcher at American Institute for Research. We're an applied research firm focused primarily, of course, in education. I have colleagues in early childhood, K-12, and then my team focuses primarily on post-secondary. Some of my colleagues who couldn't join us today, but I inserted their photo and bios here. You can find out a bit more about us at cberesearch.org. That's also where reports that I'll talk about today and all sorts of other tools and guides and all sorts of other things are posted. So that is one resource right from the start. And a bit about what our team does. So our post-secondary CBE research team has been studying the adoption of CBE programs at institutions since about 2018. And that's what I'll spend most of the time talking about today is that particular research, that survey. Since 2015, a while back now, my goodness, 6 years ago now, we've been engaged in research about CBE programs and students' experiences in those programs. Of course, in 2015, those were largely, the early versions of this wave of CBE, at least. Of course, CBE goes back decades. But we've been studying students' experiences and then who enrolls, how they fare in terms of outcomes, and qualitatively what their experiences are. We also have a collaborative of research partners that focus on a variety of other topics. So one is really focused on assessments and competency identification. We have other folks studying social network analysis and CBE programs. Sort of one studies the faculty experience, to kind of run the gamut. If you have questions about their work, I can try my best to answer, but I might have to, if you're really interested, I might have to offer to connect you to the people who are leading that research. Okay, so for today's discussion, my goals here, goals defined loosely perhaps, is to share some overall takeaways from our 2019 National Survey of Post-Secondary CBE. You might think to yourself, 2019, that's so long ago, and you are right. In 2020, this was an annual survey. We intended to field it in spring 2020. We had the invitations ready to roll the week of March, maybe like 15th or so, which of course was the week that all sorts of, everyone on campuses across the country was focused on getting, much less density on their campuses and keeping everyone safe. So we just sent out the 2020 version of this survey late last fall, so we don't have the results yet. So we'll talk about the 2019 findings today, and then as you can see in the discussion bullet at the bottom there, think about how might these trends change or not in now that we've all lived through 2020. And of course, I'm hoping to share and discuss any findings and insights that might give you kind of a sense of the state of the field as best we can tell from this survey. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we'll leave time for discussion. And then we already covered this, but please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. I'll gladly pause for Q&A throughout. So I want to start, and I do not trust the Zoom poll, or I do not trust my ability to perfectly manage the Zoom polls. So I would like you to enter into the chat as a good opportunity to find that chat. Just the best category you would stick you or your institution in terms of CBE. So what best describes your interest in CBE? You can write none, interested if you're interested, exploring but don't have a program underway, and then adapting if you're kind of close to implementing a program. Just want to get a sense of kind of who's in the room and what you might be most interested to learn about. So far, we're 4 for 4, 5 for 5, 6 for 6 on interested. Okay, all right, so interested, that's good. Anyone who wrote none, I would have been curious about their motivations for attending this. Okay, so I will try to orient some questions about that throughout, or with that in mind. If you if you're interested and have particular questions, please do not hesitate to enter them into the chat, no matter what slide I'm on, whether it says Q&A or not. And I'm glad to pause and talk. Okay, so Cbe and equity. So the first question I get these days, and this is of course the theme of the conference, so I really wanted to focus on this, is people will say, does Cbe promote equity? Or in the context of this conference, does it ensure equitable learning? So my take on this is not some research finding per se, or what most institutions think, but what's promising to me is that the principle of CBE, that it focuses on helping each student reach mastery rather than the traditional approach of sorting, grading, and ranking students kind of against each other, essentially, is that sort of cited as progress toward equity. But of course, and this gives rise to all of the topics in all the breakout sessions today and tomorrow, it depends on implementation. There's a bunch of questions and moments where you can either advance equity or contribute to further inequities in any kind of program model implementation, whether it's CBE or traditional, frankly. And unfortunately, that can be extremely hard to capture in surveys. So I don't necessarily think our survey does an amazing job speaking to the degree to which institutions are implementing CBE with an equity mindset, with equity kind of at the center of their practice, their decisions about individual practices. We can talk a little bit, we do ask them what their motivations for CBE are, we can talk about that. But do they implement it in a way that advances equity? We don't have, we can't get that from a survey, and it would require like deep work. So we hope to do that, some of that soon with a smaller set of programs. But our survey today doesn't quite answer this question. I'm interested. If anyone has a very different take on whether Cbe promotes equity or even if you agree with this. I'd be really, really interested to hear it in the chat. And then, as I mentioned, some of the practices embedded in Cbe can lend themselves to advancing equity if implemented intentionally, and of course, with equity at the center. Some of the things actually came up this morning, so formative and authentic assessments, of course, personalized support, the coach role that's often, but not always, embedded in Cbe programs. The flexibility may remove barriers to success, right? Some people are just prevented from participating in higher ed currently because of issues with flexibility, time, et cetera. Recognition of learning no matter where it happens. And then transparency of learning, both to the especially to the learner. They understand why hopefully they can understand why they're learning something. Of course, implementing these things with if you're not thinking about equity, not intentionally trying to put equity as your motivation, can do the opposite, right? If Cbe programs could be really inequitable, they could mean that certain types of students with certain backgrounds or certain privileges in their current life race through and finish really quickly and save a whole bunch of money while others don't, right? It'll be really, really important to consider that, especially through a racial equity lens, and there's all sorts of other dimensions, age, income, et cetera. Okay. So the survey itself, just a little bit about that. As I said, it's a survey of institutions. So this is not a survey of students enrolled. Some people have done that kind of in individual programs, not nationally. But this is a survey of institutions. So we're trying to better understand the landscape of Cbe interest, adoption, and perceptions of institutions. And in 2019, we had 602 institutions respond, which was an 18.4 response rate because we sent it to pretty much all the most of the institutions that were Title IV eligible in the country. All right. Ooh, I had an animation here. Okay. So the other question that comes up quickly, of course, is how do you define Cbe? And nationally, definitions of Cbe, of course, varies. That animation ended. Okay, well, that paragraph had more text there. We asked about core Cbe elements and practices that may be kind of on the path to Cbe or related to Cbe, but would not count kind of as Cbe on their own. So I hope this is big enough that you can see this. I spent a lot of time trying to find the right size here. But the elements that we considered, these are sort of core to the definition of Cbe, are the flexible pacing, program completion, and course-to-course advancement is based on mastering all competencies. Learning is measured in competencies, and these two are mapped to measures of seat time, right? So they're still in kind of a credit hour format, but they're mapping back and forth, but it's in a, it looks like Cbe to the student, but administratively they're mapping to credit hours, or this is a direct assessment program. So there's not a ton of those in the country, but learning measured in competencies and quantified with no reference to seat time. That's a special designation in the U.S. Department of Education. Then these other elements we don't consider enough to be Cbe. They're probably interesting practices, but they don't sort of rise to the level of Cbe, but we still wanted to learn about them. We still wanted to understand the level of adoption. So those are about defining competencies at the program level, and then down here at the course level, developing competencies with employers, and using prior learning assessment to award credit and for placement and personalization. So as you can see, the Cbe elements that we counted had much lower adoption than those that were not Cbe, which did not surprise us at all. PLA and all sorts of things have had sort of a wider spread, depending on what people think they mean by co-developing with employers. That's been a focus and something people have been very interested in for a long time. So that didn't surprise us much. Okay, so some key overall takeaways. Oh, sorry, so last point on this is that this is how we defined Cbe. We didn't say, here's our strict definition, do you do this, yes or no? We tried to essentially deduce it from what practices folks said they were doing. So if if a respondent selected some of these elements, we said, oh, I think we want to learn more about that. And then we gave them a definition later and said, do you do this? Is this what you meant by CBE? So we had a second chance to catch them. Okay, so key overall takeaways. So this is what we found, and then this link, which I'll make sure that this deck is available, this link will take you to the full report if you're interested in reading it. All the graphs and everything I'll talk about today are from this report. So the key overall takeaways are slow but steady growth in CBE. So we did this in 2018 and 19, so we're comparing that. Continued presence of barriers that are both internal to the institution and external to the institution, which doesn't surprise almost every practitioner audience I talk to says, of course, but when we talk to policy audiences, they're sometimes surprised that there's internal barriers, right? They think, oh, if we just change this legislation, it'll be easy, and that's not the case. And then finally, there's persistent and essentially unchanged from the prior year, 2018, optimism about CBE growth in the future. And that in particular is one that I'll be interested to see whether you all think that we should expect to see the same thing with our 2020 results, or if you think it'll change drastically. So just a bit, this is just kind of a detail on each one of those points. So the slow but steady growth, this is what I meant. In 2018, these are unweighted figures, just counts from the institutions we heard from. In 2018, we had 57 institutions say, we have a CBE program up and running. And it was across those 57, there were 512. So clearly, many institutions that had CBE programs had many, right? Many, roughly, not quite an average of 10 each. That's not really how it played out. A lot have one or two, and then there's some with many. But that's kind of a quick breakdown. In 2019, we heard from 64 institutions saying that they had 588 programs. Total, the split between undergraduate and graduate is that top graph, so 492 and then 96 graduate programs. And then this was the breakdown. So kind of like the question I asked you before, this was the breakdown of our total respondents. So almost 100 of our respondents said we have no interest in CBE, but we'll take your survey anyway. 136 said that they were interested in CBE. Far more, 309 said they were in progress of adopting some piece of CBE, but didn't have a program yet. And then the 64 is how many who had programs up and running. And just a quick note is that the increase, we wanted to make sure that the increase we saw wasn't exclusively driven by just hearing from more institutions overall in the survey, and that wasn't the case. It wasn't just driven by new respondents. Okay, I'm trying to keep one eye on the chat, so please feel free to ask any questions at any point. So I said a little bit earlier that we'd take a look at motivations for adopting CBE, which I think is one of the more, can potentially be revealing. So of the institutions who have adopted CBE or are interested in adopting it, the most commonly cited motivations were expanding access for non-traditional, quote unquote, or today's students, responding to workforce needs, and a desire to improve learning outcomes. So I think especially that first and third bullet are really interesting in the context of today's presentation or today's symposium. So expanding access might mean it didn't quite use the language of equity per se, but it's at least interesting to think about whether, who are they thinking about? We don't know who exactly. We didn't say, please fill in here what particular population you mean when you say that. I sort of wish we had, but it's potentially a signal that some institutions are thinking about this and trying to think about it as a tool to advance equity. And then desire to improve learning outcomes also sort of surprised me. We hear a ton, right, about this responding to workforce needs. So it was fascinating to me to see the desire to improve learning outcomes as something people were explicitly saying was one of their top motivations. No surprise, desire to lower tuition was the lowest or the least frequently selected option, because revenue still matters. Let's see here. So then number 2, the second finding I showed a little bit earlier, was about continued presence of internal and external barriers. So this shows all the barriers, which I realize it's a lot to read. And then the orange, so just to orient you to this graph, the orange is, we said, did this factor help or hinder? Blue is this helped, orange is hindered. And then the light orange is somewhat hindered, and bright, deeper orange is significantly hindered. So what we mean by internal and external. So the most common barriers across the different groups were FSA, or so federal student aid regulations and processes, right? So if you need to take, if you're trying to get direct assessment approval, you have to take it to the Department of Ed. There's all these regulations you have to comply with. Sometimes you feel these through the accreditation and substantive change. But those regulations and processes we considered an external barrier, right? It's an accrediting body. Other priority initiatives, though, is something we considered an internal barrier, right? The college had other priorities. We couldn't advance, CBE, or it would take too much capital internally to advance CBE. And then program startup costs, probably a mix actually, but certainly at least partially an internal barrier. Although I know some states, for instance, have tried to offset this barrier by offering kind of pilot startup costs, mini grants. And then business systems and processes, another barrier that we considered internal to the institution, right? It's your learning management system, it's your student information system. All those business systems are built deeply around the credit hour. So depending on how someone was implementing CPEs, it might be a big barrier, and depending on how and the buy-in of your institutional research and information technology units. And then finally, on-campus expertise for developing CBE programs. So this is something that I think is interesting for my understanding is that most of the audience, or most of the group at the symposium is learning outcomes assessment coordinators, or at least some of the audience. And so I'm fascinated to imagine what your reaction to this might be. But for those who have not yet adopted, they said they commonly cited on-campus expertise for developing CBE as a barrier, right? We don't have somebody, or I imagine that they were thinking, we don't have somebody on this campus who knows how to do CBE, who can help us do it. In a very different world, those who already had CBE programs said that this was a factor that helped them. So someone on their campus understood CBE, whether they hired that person on purpose or whether that person just happened to have a background in CBE. We of course don't know, and this is certainly my interpretation. But it was an interesting distinction between the two groups. That was all those who had successfully adopted experienced FSA regulations as a barrier, other priorities, right? But this one seemed to be something that was very different among the two groups. All that said, though, I would be remiss if I did not point out that don't know was a common response across the board. There were a lot, those gray bars are those who said don't know. Sometimes I think that meant we don't quite understand what that is, like this one. But other times they just might not know the answer to whether that was a barrier or not. Okay, and then the third finding we highlighted was persistent optimism about CBE growth in the future. So overall, when we put everyone together, 76% believe that CBE will grow in the next 5 years. So the vast majority said we think it'll grow. Some said we think it'll stay the same, and a very small share said we think it'll decrease. That was extremely consistent, by the way. In 2018, that figure was 75%. And it wasn't just the same institutions, by the way, but it was extremely consistent to the point where I thought, did I use last year's file when we went to calculate this? And that holds true. This is our first question: is does it matter whether you're adopting CBE in your perception, or whether you're at a 2-year or 4-year. Are the community colleges having a very different conversation than 4-year institutions? And for the most part, it does vary somewhat, but there's still generally optimism across all groups. So over here, orange is, we think it'll increase. So you can see that those who have adopted it think everyone else is coming along with them. Those who are interested but haven't adopted yet are still largely optimistic about Cbe growing, thinking it'll increase. For those with no interest, it was a little bit closer to 50-50. Some believed, we think at least our peers will continue to do this even if they don't have interest themselves, or that it would stay the same. And then down here, 2-year and 4-year, pretty similar. I mean, a little bit of difference, but pretty similar. Still the majority believe it will grow. So that was about nationally, by the way. So that was persistent optimism that Cbe will grow kind of nationally across the country. We then asked them about their own institution. So do you think you will add programs at your own institution over the next 5 years? And 61% said yes, we think it will increase at our own institution. And then 37% said it'll stay the same. And then a very, very small percentage said no, it'll decrease. Okay, so those were the big picture things that when we look across our results, we think, oh, there's something interesting here, right? There's kind of a big story there. I also have a set of graphs that I brought that are just sort of more kind of food for thought that might be interesting. I'll start to explain them, but please feel free to put in the chat like that you want to go deeper. I'll try to move generally pretty quickly, but you can sort of flag that you want to go deeper on something at any point. Okay, so planning steps. So this, if an institution told us that they were planning for Cbe, we then asked them what they had done to move towards that. So the first year, all sorts of people said we're planning for Cbe, and then we asked them pretty much no other questions, which then left a huge question mark for us, is what does that mean? So then in the second year, we said, what do you mean? Here are some stages that we borrowed from the Competency-Based Education Network Quality Framework. These are some stages or steps that might happen in the planning process. What have you done so far to help us better understand what that looks like? So most commonly, and probably no surprise to this group, is developing competencies and assessments, then engaging employers and external partners in developing competencies, and finally, engaging stakeholders within this institution to assess readiness for Cbe. Those were the 3 most commonly accomplished steps. The fourth one that you can see here is engaging stakeholders within the institute. Oh, sorry, I already said that. Okay, that's what I combined as assessments and competencies. Less commonly done were accreditation, data collection plan, designing the faculty and staff roles in the learner experience, tech, business model, and transcripts. I will say though that it's not the case that everyone, this wasn't a specific funnel, right? It wasn't like most people did this and then only those who had passed these steps had done the next thing, right? It was kind of a mix. Some institutions had thought about, for instance, accreditation, but they hadn't engaged with employers or maybe even internal stakeholders, a real mix. So there was not a single sequence that emerged from this list, which was somewhat surprising to us. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. If anyone has questions, please let me know. Students enrolling in Cbe programs. Okay, so this is another place where if someone said, earlier on that they were interested in expanding access for quote unquote non-traditional students, we then tried to understand who was actually enrolling, or at least how they compared, how the populations of their Cbe programs compared to their traditional programs. So Cbe student populations were generally similar. Well, first, many said don't know. So the person responding didn't have this data handy perhaps, or didn't know at the time, or maybe they don't collect some of these, or or share them regularly in dashboards. So lots of don't knows, but otherwise same was the most common answer on all of these, I believe, although on military it's very close.
Kelly, Amber has a question. Yep. She asks, how does Cbe fit with credit transfers between colleges? Thank you.
Oh, great question. And I think that can vary. In a perfect world, Cbe would make that easy, right? You know, any particular competency could transfer, but that's not always the case. I will say my understanding, and you know what, I've realized, I'm not sure if you mean credit transfer. So if someone transfers to a Cbe program, how do they get credit for their previous experience? Or if you mean if they do credit, if they do a Cbe program first and then transfer to a credit, you know, a traditional program. I'm not sure which way. Both. Okay, cool. So lots of these programs enroll a lot of students who have prior college credit, right? This is the second bar here. And in fact, more was, you know, pretty large share. So we have more students with prior college credit in our Cbe programs. I don't know the exact details. To really talk about the exact details, I might need to refer you to some program directors. But a lot of them will actually articulate, like review transcripts and articulate some credit into competencies. Sometimes they reassess some portions of it. I'm not remembering which places are most common for that. So they do, a lot of them do articulate credit earned into competencies in your, you know, in a program. The actual mechanics of that, I would need to refer you to someone else. And I have some, if you send me, I have my email address at the end of this. If you send me an email, I'm happy to connect you. The other way, so Cbe programs moving to a, you know, traditional program or something is a little bit stickier. My understanding is that most Cbe programs currently maintain both a kind of Cbe transcript and basically like an equivalent traditional transcript at this point. You know, I think many of them would say in a perfect future world when, you know, competencies are the currency of higher ed, we don't, you know, maybe we won't need that, but for now, in part to kind of reassure students, reassure learners, they'll keep kind of a traditional transcript, quote unquote, that's ready to be articulated to somewhere else they go. I think that's especially, I've heard that especially talked about when it comes to grad schools. So someone finishing a bachelor's degree might want to use it for grad schools. I'm happy to dig into that more if I didn't quite cover that question. There's lots of, I've heard lots of interesting discussions about how to translate a mastery. So if you demonstrate mastery, what does that translate to? Is that an A? Is that a B? Lots of really interesting questions. I don't think that's settled in the field. I think there's very different practices happening across different campuses. So it might be really good to talk to multiple, if you're wrestling with that particular question, it might be really good to talk to multiple folks who currently run Cbe programs. Okay, let's see here. Generally, lots of similar age, but also plenty of folks with Cbe programs said our Cbe programs have higher shares of adult learners over 25. Least common, or at least equal, similar to the veterans or active duty military, is those who said our Cbe programs have more, for slight simplicity here, like learners of color or non. So we asked the question in terms of white or non-white students. We could definitely phrase that question better, but generally it's not the case that most of them said, oh, our Cbe programs are full of Black students or Hispanic students. That's not the case currently. And that I should mention, of course, that some other work has been done on this question, and this finding generally aligns with that, that other work. Delivery mode. Okay, so this is also a common question, probably not with this group, but we've gotten plenty of questions. Is Cpe just online? You know, the kind of next gen online? And no. So 37% said we are entirely online, but the rest were some combination of hybrid or blended. This predominantly face-to-face with online assignments is probably just face-to-face. But there's lots of hybrid and blended, and then there is some face-to-face. So this is perhaps especially common in some technical programs. So plenty of Cbe programs are also in kind of applied technology type programs at community colleges. And of course, those, you know, if you were doing like a CNA program, right, there's still plenty of clinical, other sorts of things that have to happen in person, and that is possible. Price point and structure. Okay, so a lot of conversation in Cbe can get very exciting when it comes to pricing models. So we have two questions about this of those who had Cbe programs. So if you had a Cbe program, we said, does it cost about the same or less expensive or more expensive than your traditional programs? Most said about the same. Of course, that question, though, embeds in it an assumption about the model. So it could be less expensive. A Cbe program could be less expensive in two ways. One, you could price it lower, of course, or you can design the program with subscription pricing or instead of kind of per credit hour pricing. Whether and how people choose to do that is a really interesting conversation. I think there's big equity considerations embedded in that discussion. So subscription models are, you know, it's not perfect description, but kind of an all-you-can-eat, right? You pay a set amount of money per 6 months or 3 months, and then you can move through as much as you can in that time. So if you can accelerate, you can pay less total kind of over the course of your degree. So folks have done that to say, let's give people the option to have a less expensive total price of degree. That should, at a minimum, I strongly encourage tracking who then accelerates. So if you choose to use a subscription model, what types of students choose to accelerate? Are you finding that basically it's your white students who are accelerating and Black students and Latinx students are not? And then you need to be very intentional about how you're pricing. Do people pay more if they go slowly? Do they pay more than they would in a traditional program if they move slowly? Is it all people who are also parents that end up paying more because they're trying to move slowly? There's lots of important questions to ask about who is paying what in a subscription model. Not to say that it's bad, but there's been lots of really good kind of debate about the equity considerations there. I'm getting close to the end, so it's just my flag to please think of any questions you want to ask. Program disciplines. This is always fascinating. We ask folks what disciplines their Cbe programs are in. These three should probably come as no surprise. They are also, so nursing, computer and information science, and business administration are also the most common bachelor's credentials in the country. We award the most as a country in these disciplines. So most of them are there, so no surprise. They also, to some degree, might lend themselves, right? Nursing, of course, has externally set competencies. So they might lend themselves to Cbe in some nice ways, or quicker move to Cbe. Although, if we said other, other, please specify, some of the program names that respondents entered, sounded like the kinds of programs you would, develop in the last few years. So some of them unmanned aerial vehicles, I think. So aka drones, drone operation, or cybersecurity, or some of the things that have really sort of, expanded in higher ed in the last few years, is sort of made us wonder as a research team, is it that people are moving high demand programs into CBE modes, or are they or sometimes they say, oh, we need to build a new program, let's do it in a CBE model just right from the start. And it looks like kind of a mix. And then finally, would CBE work at my institution type? This is another question we get all the time. And the answer, we don't know if it will work at any particular institution. I think it can work at any type of institution. So we disaggregated by sector and level, and we saw CBE. So this is of all CBE, all institutions that have CBE, what sector and level. We see them at all types. And when we looked at every other type of classification, so Carnegie classifications, levels of urbanicity, types of minority serving institutions, so HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions, we saw CBE programs at least one example of a CBE program at every type. So that's really interesting. It kind of can span, not to say that it will be perfect, but it can potentially work at any particular type of institution. Ooh, okay, so I have been talking a lot, and I would like to not talk as much at you. So I will turn it over to you. What questions do you have? And if you don't have any questions, I pose 2 questions to you. How do you think this might change in light of 2020? And what is most interesting or might help you in your own work? So I will now stop
And
talking.
participants, I beg your pardon, participants, feel free to unmute yourselves at this time. Thank you very much. Or you can pose your question in the chat if you'd prefer to do that.
Yeah, and I'm particularly interested in anything you think might, well, you don't even have to say a finding would change in 2020, but just something you wonder about competency-based education, given all that happened in 2020, all the experiences that faculty had and that administrators had, or IT units trying to move things online. I'd be fascinated to hear what you think.
So Kelly, this is Wai Ling. I'm from San Diego. And we just recently had a conversation about CBE, so it's really new to our college. And a couple of things that you had mentioned, during your whole presentation are, how does it translate to the grades? They talked about dual transcripts, etc. And ideas, was popping in my head. I'm in child development. And so there are a lot of competencies that may not be, that are gaps in our courses that I think would really work. However, and if you can clarify this, these competencies do not translate into the regular course classes. Is that correct?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so are you saying it might be kind of a small competency or something that might not?
So can the competency-based education translate into a course, and a traditional credit course? What are your experiences with that?
Great question. Okay, I think I can answer this question, but by all means tell me if I'm not quite getting it. So very early on in my experiences studying CBE, someone said the word "a course-like object" to me. And what they meant was that an institution trying to offer CBE or interested in CBE for whatever reason, kind of needed to maintain much more of kind of a course structure than, more of a, like there's sort of a spectrum, right? There's super flexible, everyone's on their own pace. Anybody who's ever taught a course would find CBE sort of unrecognizable, right? There's not kind of all the trappings of a course involved, versus there are kind of heavily tied to a course structure CBE programs. They offer students, less flexibility often, and they sort of, so there are some, there's pros and cons on both sides, but there are examples of CBE that are very much, they kind of look a lot more like a course. So they're sort of fitting CBE into more of a course structure. I'm not articulating that incredibly well, but I'm interested. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, I'm just saying that I guess my question is that, can you develop a CBE, the modules, or I'm not really too honed on it, but can that equal, let's say, child development 101? Can you structure it in a more flexible way that they get through the course outline? And so if they take this, can we, can it be equivalent to a course?
Yes. Yep. So yes, I mean, in some ways CBE is flexible enough that you can sort of borrow lots of principles and fit all sorts of things. So I think you can. I think the advice that I've heard from some practitioners is to make sure you're reassessing what you did offer in your, for example, CD 101, right? So look at, review that course, make sure that it really, if you were to backward design it today, you would still pick all of that. But yes, you can kind of modularize courses and put that into more of a CBE course sort of format.
Okay, because we were thinking about, do it by credit by design, by credit by, I forget what it is, but, by exam, sorry, credit by exam. And then they can go ahead and, use that format, the CBE format, to at the end get the credit by design. Because the problem is we can develop a lot of these CBE courses, but even the state permits are not going to acknowledge at this time the CBE classes. They still have to have the online, the courses is what they want.
Got it. Okay. And yes, I should make sure that I say I do not speak on behalf of like a state or federal. This is sort of, have I heard about this from other institutions somewhere? Yes. I just want to be clear that the state might have, or the state or federal or accreditors, right, might have different rules. But yes, I think there's sort of there's definitely a spectrum and lots of really creative ways people have mapped different pieces back and forth between kind of their existing programs that they already had and what they want to accomplish in kind of a CBE-ish or CBE-esque model.
Thank you. You answered my question, Kelly. Thank you.
Of course. And we've got still 10 minutes left, so I'm happy to answer more. I see when developing CBE courses, do you start with learning outcomes and use backwards design? Ideally, as the competency-based education network folks would say, yes, right? That is how you want to start, is these learning outcomes, I think at the program level, and then use backward design. I think there's a sort of a spectrum of how much you look at what your existing courses have done, or if you've already done that in some of your, for your program, right, just not with CBE in mind. You can borrow some of your traditional or existing course. That was in response to one of the questions in the chat. Any other questions or predictions that you want to make about post-2020?
Hey,
yes, could you
Lavi.
speak- Oh, go ahead. Oh, that might have been someone just joining. Okay, so could you speak a bit more about the relationship between CBE and CPL, which I think is credit for prior learning, if I'm referencing acronyms correctly? It's on one of your slides, it's related but not the same. Yes, great question. So credit for prior learning is the kind of the simplest version. Credit for prior learning is sort of on the front end at kind of intake or at the beginning of your program. So kind of the prior learning assessment process that you go through when someone, when a learner starts or expresses interest in the program, that we sort of treat that as one function. So giving credit for learning they have either through past post-secondary experience or work or life experience, that is sort of at the front end of the program. CBE programs are the full program design. So you have converted the activity of helping a learner learn, right? That used to look perhaps a little bit more like a faculty member teaching in a classroom, with all students moving at the same time, 15-week courses, grades at the end, that you've converted your program into a CBE format. So it's some of the assessment functions might still, the focus on assessment and the importance of assessment is true in both, but credit for prior learning is on the front end for things prior to the institution. The CBE program really speaks to once they enroll, it's kind of competency-based, often with design, included in the design, most of the time is formative assessments, summative assessments at the end to officially demonstrate competency with lots of intentionally designed support or sometimes a student success coach along the way. So it's kind of the when it happens and maybe from whom to some degree is kind of the difference between those two things. Does that help?
It does. I was sort of thinking about it in terms of as faculty are looking at their courses and programs through the lens of CPL and CBE. And I think this speaks a little bit to the woman who spoke before about modularizing courses. I'm just wondering if sort of the process for looking at courses like for CPL, where you're looking at the competencies by which you would be judging whether to award CPL is sort of the same process of sort of the way you're looking at courses and competencies and outcomes.
Yeah, that's
I'm not sure if that makes
question.
sense.
No, it very much does. I am not a deep assessment expert, so take what I say with a grain of salt. But I think the process, if faculty are already reviewing their courses and saying, what are the competencies embedded in this course that you could potentially, conduct kind of CPL, a student could get CPL for this module, right? So if you've modularized the course, you could get CPL for any one or more of those competencies, then yes, I think that is exactly the same way, or very similar at least, way you would think about breaking it down for a CBE program, right? Because anything someone does not get prior learning credit for would then be something you're modularizing and supporting them through. And that is not exactly CBE, but it's certainly a strong component of CBE. Or I should say that's kind of the major curriculum focus of CBE. There's sort of other pieces, but that's a huge part. Okay, there's a few more minutes. I'm happy to take other questions or points of interest or predictions. Otherwise, I can let you go early.
I just wanted to add, this is Ling again, Kelly, that, just through the seminar, things, popped up and, probably for our field, it would be something that could be used for professional development because our permits, in teaching early childhood requires, several hours, per year or so, that this might really work on those, for interests in different areas, that we could go ahead and I think this is great flexibility for those who are already working in the field, and that they, want to augment their education. But, so I just wanted to share that, that possibly, that's something that we would do, just like the new programs, like in drones or cyber security that you had mentioned. So thank you. I appreciate this presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, we haven't asked as much about sort of continuing education or professional development offerings, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's plenty of creative work going on there, as people think about sort of borrowing the principles of CBE for those sorts of formats. So, established professionals seeking professional development. Excellent. Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'm happy to hang on in case anyone is still formulating a question. But thank you all so much. Thanks for your questions. And I hope this was at least a little bit useful to you. I will page forward here, which I think has my email address on it. Yes. My email address is at the bottom. If you have any questions or say, oh, I want to talk to somebody who runs the CBE program who can talk more, just let me know. I'm happy to connect you. And thank you,
Kelly Parsons.
Yes. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you to Kelly for her session on State of the Field results from the National Survey of Competency-Based Education. And lunch is next at 12:30. But we do invite you to join us for the 12:45 p.m. optional lunch networking lounge discussions. That's going to be about 45 minutes. And then at 1:30, you've got breakout 3. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the symposium. We'll hang on until 2 more minutes and we have to close up. Thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you.
Kelly, hi. Sorry,
Hi.
This is really new to our college, and one of the surprising things that I learned, we're in the CTE program, and again, under child development for us, but it seems to, and let me go ahead and so that you can see me, Kelly. But one of the things that was mentioned that our college, our college has not yet adopted the program. So is that something that you find that they have to adopt it before we can even offer the CBE?
Oh, interesting. So the college.
Yeah, it's a
the
2-year.
College hasn't.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I just wanted to ask that, if you had any idea that they have to accept, they have to agree upon, doing the CBE.
That's a great question. I mean, I assume so, but I can't say that I know for sure. I would be glad. Has anyone mentioned Salt Lake Community College to you?
No.
No. Okay, they're in Utah, so they're not necessarily local, but they their work is in. They first built CBE programs in their School of Applied Technology, and I think they have, which is essentially their CTE arm. They might have helpful perspectives or advice, strategies, etc., that might be helpful to you.
Okay, that sounds good. So thank you again. Appreciate your time.
Yes, thank you. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Thank you, Kelly. I feel so badly for you. I'm just going to stop the recording now.
No.